Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Kurt Beavers, and I am from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a father of three and an enthusiast about our physicians who have decided to make prevention important to the medical practices today. We have a very special guest on the line tonight. He is a friend of mine. His name is Dr. Paul Williams, and Paul is a 1975 graduate of the West Virginia University School of Medicine. I'll say go Mountaineers just for you, Paul. After a family practice residency and 4 years of practice in Western Maryland, Paul practiced emergency medicine in Atlanta, Georgia for 22 years. Currently, he serves as the corporate medical director for NSA in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to read you this quote because I believe this is what embodies Paul's message to the wellness industry and physicians around the world. And I'm going to read this quote to you. It says, "Physicians educated in America have very little training in or knowledge of nutrition. In spite of this, we are seen by our patients as authorities in this area. Most Americans are deficient in whole food nutrition and don't even know it. This lack has marked negative impact on our rate of aging, our ability to heal, and our risk of degenerative diseases. Physicians must be more knowledgeable in this area if we are to provide our patients with the best care." I know you're excited as I am to hear Dr. Paul talk to us tonight about why prevention makes sense. Thanks for being with us, Paul.
Kurt, it's my pleasure, and good evening to those who are listening in. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this. I have become quite interested in nutrition over the last number of years. I've been interested in it for a long time, but especially with respect to the subject we're going to talk about tonight, I really think it's a critical area we need to know more about. Most of us did not learn much about nutrition in general in medical school. A recent survey found that only about 3% of today's medical students take any sort of elective class in nutrition. So there's a big deficiency, I believe, in our knowledge with respect to especially the subject called whole food nutrition. And that's basically what we're going to focus on tonight, and I will explain that more here in just a moment. For most of us, when we think about human nutrition, we tend to think about subjects like protein and fat and carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, perhaps obesity and percent body fat. Likely have flashbacks of having to memorize the Krebs cycle at some time or another. But the area that we don't know a lot about is the area of nutrients called phytonutrients. And this basically just means a nutrient found in a plant. So we're talking about the nutrients that we get from the foods that we get from plants. The number of phytonutrients in the foods we eat, the extensive number and the complexity of this, and especially its importance in human biochemistry and health, really wasn't even on the radar until the early 1990s. So we've known very little about this until the last 20 years, and we've been learning more over that time. This partially accounts for why so few of us know anything about it, because it wasn't understood or known about when we were in school. It wasn't there to be learned. But when we look at that term phytonutrients, basically it is the nutrients that we get from fruits and vegetables, grains, nuts, berries, beans, etc., all of the foods that we can get from plants. These are substances that are called biodynamic. They form in the plant as part of the plant's life cycle, and many of them play protective roles for the plant in that life cycle. The number of them is really astounding. So far, a little over 12,000 of them have been isolated and identified, and the estimate by those people who are doing this study is that there will be somewhere between 30 and 50,000 when the count is all done. And another factor is that the human body takes these in and converts them into thousands of other substances that play roles in our biochemistry. The other important part of this concept is that none of these phytonutrients are needed in large amounts every day, but rather a little bit of everything is the key. There is a tremendous synergistic effect to having these all together. This is the way that our cells know how to use this nutrition. And I think that the foundation for making that statement and for thinking about it in this way is if we just go back to thinking about what our cells adapted to. If we look at our human ancestors' diet of a very, very long time ago, plants obviously had to be a major part of it. And our evolving cells adapted to the availability of these nutrients, these phytonutrients, and therefore came to depend on a steady supply of them. I don't think it is a stretch to say that we can think of this in the same way that we think of the other major requirements from our environment, primarily oxygen and water. Obviously, our cells adapted to the availability of both of those, and just as it did to this whole food-based nutrition. This means that cellular function and therefore organ and organ system function depend on a steady supply of these nutrients. And it's also, I think, important to realize or to remember, and I think a lot of us do kind of forget this sometimes, is that we have an inherent capacity to stay well. You can even take this back to one of the first things we all learned in biology at some level, the survival of the individual that leads to survival of the species. We have that inherent capacity to minimize or control or even heal problems that do occur and to prevent many others if we take care of our bodies correctly. That includes feeding them correctly, and we've come to understand that that means including enough of this whole food-based nutrition, these phytonutrients in our daily intake. Now, there's a process in the body that I did not hear about in school that long ago, but I know today's students learn a lot about this, called oxidative stress. This is a result of our oxygen metabolism, and we create what are called reactive oxygen species. There are some reactive nitrogen species as well. These are the terms in the medical literature. The lay term is free radicals. These are electrically charged, basically, particles. Each is missing an electron, and that makes them very unstable. And they will interact with any cellular structure with which they come in contact, and that interaction is an oxidizing reaction. So basically it's a redox reaction. The amount of this oxidative damage that is occurring determines our rate of aging and risk of disease. And this was pretty clearly set out, 15 years ago in one of the issues of the New England Journal that the main topic of which was oxidative stress. There were a couple of significant papers in that issue on this, and the editorial conclusion was that the debate is over. Oxidative stress is clearly the process that determines rate of aging, risk of disease, and ultimately your cause of death. So obviously it would be a good thing to do to keep this process to a minimum. It cannot be eliminated. You wouldn't want to, because there is a role for these oxidizing structures in some parts of our metabolism. For instance, I know that in a fracture, you need oxidative damage to help break down the injured bone so that the new bone can be produced in that same area. So you have to have some of these reactive species, but we get into trouble when there are too many. The production of them is increased by several different things. Smoking is at the top of the list, probably. This produces a tremendous excess of these reactive species, and this is why so many smokers look so much older than they really are. Physical stress does this as well. It's understandable that someone who's not getting enough rest and is under emotional stress as well from finances and 2 or 3 jobs, etc., might well be harming himself. But the other thing that a lot of people don't realize that can play a role here is intentional physical exertion or exercise. We know that we must be active physically in order to be as healthy as possible, but it can have a negative impact if your nutrition is not right. When a person is oxidizing, using muscles at a higher level of activity, our respiratory rate and heart rate go up to deliver more oxygen to the muscle cells so that they can use it for energy, but that also means they're producing more of these reactive species. There are many long distance runners, for instance, who look much older than they really are. They've done all of that high level exertion without the whole food based nutrition that helps offset this reactive or this oxidative damage. Without the appropriate nutrition, exercise also speeds up the rate of aging and increases the risk of disease. Now, obviously, this process can be decreased by not doing the things that increase it, certainly like smoking, but it's also decreased by the right nutrition. Now, before I get into that in a little bit more detail, I want to ask you to think about the oxidative stress of a physician's lifestyle. This can often be tremendous. We tend to have, from the day we entered school, we've had long and irregular hours, interrupted sleep patterns, some more than others, depending on your specialty, multiple demands on our time, concerns about our patients, concerns about our practices, our business, our overhead, our income, our employees, etc. And often we are so on the go that we do not eat regularly or have any time to think about what the next meal is going to be. So we usually eat whatever is handy. This is usually what someone else brought to the office or the OR or ER or L&D that day. And it's usually that person's comfort food. So it certainly is not going to be, for the most part, plant-based nutrition. And unfortunately, some of us still smoke as well. The offsetting nutrition for this process is the nutrition that contains a lot of nutrients that can function as antioxidants. And indeed, thousands of these phytonutrients have this capacity. They neutralize the reactive species before they can cause the cellular damage that increases rate of aging and risk of disease. Thousands of these phytonutrients have the capacity to do this. Some of our best known nutrients are indeed very strong antioxidants, vitamin C and vitamin E, for instance. In our typical way of thinking, when we look at a nutrient, we tend to believe that, well, if that tiny little bit's good for me, a larger amount will be even better for me. And it does not work that way. With these phytonutrients, it's important to realize that they function in groups. And in any one group, they function in a sequence. One works first, then the next, and on down the line, passing along an electron to help neutralize the reactive species. So you cannot take large doses of isolated antioxidants and expect to have your oxidative stress decreased. And as I'm sure most of you know, there have been good studies that clearly raise a serious question about the risk, the potential harm of taking large doses of isolated nutrients, and some of those that have been looked at have been vitamin C and vitamin E. So clearly that is not that's not the answer. Again, we're back to whole food-based nutrition with a tiny bit of each of tens of thousands of nutrients. Now, these next few slides are certainly obviously not, we're not going to discuss in detail. They are to just maybe superficially indicate the extent or the complexity of this. This page shows just 400 of the phytonutrients that have been isolated from an apple. And it's believed that there are at least 10,000 in any piece of produce. The roles that these phytonutrients encompass, they serve as antioxidants, reduce lipid peroxidation, they're important in immune response, cell-to-cell communication, estrogen metabolism, apoptosis of cancer cells. They help repair DNA damage, and they can detoxify carcinogens through the cytochrome P450 and phase 2 enzyme systems. This is a very short list as well. The classes, there are multiple ones. This is where biochemists really get excited, I guess, but obviously this is not going to be something that most of us practitioners would want to know in detail. But look at the list of different chemical classes of all of these, and then look at the sources. For instance, of the carotenoids, these are the ones that are from orange and red and yellow foods. These are the ones that caused your children to turn, as babies, to turn a little bit orange when you fed them a lot of strained carrots. And look at the foods that they come from, a wide variety of foods. The lutein and zeaxanthin you see down there are important in protecting the macula in the eye from oxidative damage. And lycopene, of course, which is a red color, we know is important in prostate health. Also, the polyphenols, there are several different classes of them, again, from a wide variety of foods. So another point to notice here is that having a wide variety of foods in your diet is an important part of this as well. You cannot stick to just 2 or 3 fruits and 1 vegetable and expect to get whole food nutrition. You've got to have quite a variety of foods. So the simple way or the way to simplify this very, very complex area with respect to making sure you're getting the nutrition is just eat the foods. Eat more plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, berries, beans, and all of their shapes and sizes and colors. Sounds like a simple plan, but we are not anywhere close to doing what we should be doing. This is data from a CDC survey of about 3 years ago, I believe. And they surveyed a large number of Americans and broke it down on a state-by-state basis, just asking people how many servings of fruits and vegetables they ate a day. And this is the percentage, state by state, of the ones who ate at least 5 servings a day. And the highest was 20%, and the lowest was, I believe, 8.3%. But this means nowhere in the country there's more than 20% of us eating 5 servings a day. Here in the South, Mississippi's 8.8, South Carolina is 9.3, Alabama's 9.8, and I think the 8.8 was the lowest. And this is really puzzling to me because this is an area where people could have a garden essentially year-round. So we're a very, very long way from eating enough fruits and vegetables. And this was just 5. As you likely know, obviously the way to get more of this is eat more of these foods. For a very long time, the recommendation was 5 to 9 servings a day. A serving is an amount of food about the size of a person's fist. But this was increased, this recommendation was increased about 5 years ago to 7 to 13. Now, why was that done? When we realized that most people don't even eat 5 a day, now we're saying that, well, look, even that's not enough. You need to be up higher. A great factor in this decision was that most of the produce available to most Americans today does not contain the same amounts of nutrition that those foods contained the way they were grown 40 or 50 years ago or longer. There are 3 problems that come about in trying to get enough of this nutrition from our diet today. First, the recommendation is that many servings a day of fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, the definition of fresh is ripened on the plant before it's harvested and then just recently harvested. Most of the produce available to us in grocery stores has been picked green so it won't spoil. But these phytonutrients form as part of the ripening on the plant process. And when the food is picked green, that process is stopped. Second, it's that many servings a day of fresh, raw fruits and vegetables. Many nutrients are heat labile. They're damaged when the food is cooked, and we tend to cook our food much more than we need to in many instances. I don't think you have to eat everything raw, but the less cooked your fruits and vegetables are and the more you can eat raw, I think the better. And then third, as I've said, you have to eat enough servings a day, and we're not anywhere close to that. So when you take these three problems together, I believe it is impossible for most Americans to get enough whole food nutrition from diet alone. This means that we're going to have an increased personal negative impact of our stressful lifestyle. If we're looking again at medical professionals now, it means that our patients are going to have increased health problems, are going to have a higher risk of their current problems worsening and of complications of those problems and of developing new problems. And we're going to have an increased problem attaining the best outcome for our patients. Most of our treatments for our patients are of a nature that we're asking that person's cells to respond to our treatments. And they cannot do that maximally or optimally if nutrition is not at its best level. So this leaves us with a choice. Any person either accept the consequences of a lack of whole food nutrition or change your diet enough to get to include enough whole food nutrition, or find it in some other way. And this is where the whole food-based product Juice Plus comes into the picture. Juice Plus is almost 20 years old, and it is the phytonutrients from 25 plant-ripened, raw, recently picked fruits, vegetables, berries, and grains. These foods are grown on good soil and, as I said, ripened on the plant, and shortly after harvest, they are put through a cold juicing process. The juice then basically is dried. This is done in a rapid low temperature process, so there's no heat applied at any time. And this leaves a powder that contains these tens of thousands of phytonutrients. That powder is mixed with a little bit of soluble and insoluble fiber and put in capsules and in a chewable form. I learned about Juice Plus almost 17 years ago, and I had a major question. I didn't know you could do this. How is this possible? I know that you cannot compress those whole foods down into capsule size. Well, there are two factors, basically. Number one, we're not talking about the macronutrients that take up a lot of space: protein, fat, carbohydrate, most of the fiber, and the water. We're talking about those phytonutrients, which are also called micronutrients because they are there pretty much in microgram amounts. Then the other factor is this: over 99.9% of the bulk of a piece of produce, whether it's fruit or vegetable, is water and fiber and a few substances that are volatile, that evaporate at the time of the juicing process. So the phytonutrients themselves do not take up very much space. When you take all of that other out there, even though there's tens of thousands of micronutrients there, they just don't take up a whole lot of space. This is how this is doable. This is why it can work. The main reason that I can tell you that this is effective is because we now have over 16 years of peer-reviewed, published clinical research looking at the efficacy of Juice Plus in the human body. A point I want to make before I talk a little more about the research is that there is an ongoing commitment to quality manufacturing and testing. I know many of you are probably aware of the fact that many products that are supplement type products or herbal products on the market often are tested and just do not contain what the label says they contain, and even more dangerously, sometimes have much greater amounts of some things than the label says. This organization called NSF, and the National Sanitation Foundation, is an old organization whose role basically has evolved into quality certification of products. This says that, and Juice Plus does indeed have this certification. This says that our manufacturing facilities and finished products meet basic quality assurances, that Juice Plus meets or exceeds all good manufacturing process requirements. And it says two other things. Everything that is on the label is in Juice Plus, and there's nothing in Juice Plus that isn't on the label. It is also possible to get Juice Plus that is tested one further level for professional athletes. This level of testing looks for all of the 139 banned performance enhancing substances, and there's a guarantee that there's none of them in there. That no athlete will ever fail a drug test because of taking Juice Plus. To date, 26, and actually I believe this is now closer to 30, reviewed and published studies with over 1,500, close to 1,700 participants. This is the most thoroughly researched name brand nutritional product on the market today. And here's what we know from our published studies so far. 18 of them have looked at bioavailability of these phytonutrients, and it is clear that these nutrients are very readily and easily absorbed from the gut into the bloodstream and delivered to the cells. A lot of those nutrients that we test in this manner are antioxidants, and 11 of our studies have shown a clear reduction in oxidative stress or reactive species or free radical damage from Juice Plus. One of the things that we test to show this is oxidized LDL cholesterol. The general term for that is lipid peroxide. And many of us have forgotten the point that LDL cholesterol of normal structure is not the atherogenic form of LDL, it's oxidized LDL. So if we can reduce the oxidative damage to LDL, we reduce the amount of atherogenic substance in the body. 4 of our studies have looked at immune function. When a person goes for years without enough whole food-based nutrition, many of the components of the immune system decline in their level of activity. And this means obviously that it's a much less effective immune system. Basically, Juice Plus restores those components, T cells, natural killer cells, interleukins, etc., to a normal level of activity. And the earliest study here, the pilot study on this, looked at B cell function as well. When T cell function is underactive, B cell function is overactive, and as you well know, this is a critical factor in the risk of development of an autoimmune disease. And it appears that when the T cells are brought back to a normal level of activity, that the B cells are brought under control as well. The balance among the different components of the immune system is restored. 2 of our studies have looked at systemic or subclinical inflammation, and it is very clear that Juice Plus brings about a reduction in the amount of that inflammatory process that we've realized is playing such a role in the development of many disease processes. 3 of our studies have looked at oxidative damage to DNA. And the DNA can be oxidized by these reactive species as well, and sometimes in the repair process that the cell undertakes to fix that DNA, another reactive species interferes, the repair goes wrong, and a mutation occurs. So the greater the amount of oxidative damage, the greater the risk of mutations and any of the diseases that can come from damaged DNA. Juice Plus brings about a reduction in DNA damage of up to 66%. And it's this is a huge number percentage-wise, and it amounts to something in the let me back up a step. Dr. Bruce Ames showed a number of years ago that the DNA in every cell sustains oxidative damage about 10,000 times every day. And when you consider that there are several trillion cells in the body, and you take all of that together, you're looking at trillions of damaged genes that the cell is attempting to repair, running the risk of a mutation, and we're reducing that by up to 66%. The newest study that looked at that correlated the previously mentioned reduction in inflammatory markers, the subclinical inflammation, and the markers of DNA damage. They went hand in hand. Also, another recent oxidative damage reduction study looked at a group of heavy smokers. This was done in Italy at the University of Milan. And in the initial DNA study in 1999, those researchers had made the point that they had never found anything that could reduce DNA damage in smokers until they studied Juice Plus. Here is the gold standard study proof that that is indeed occurring. There's reduction in the markers of oxidative stress in heavy smokers, and also reduction in that oxidized LDL cholesterol I mentioned a moment ago. 7 of our studies have looked at various parameters that can be measured to estimate a person's risk of cardiovascular disease, and I want to tell you about one of them. This was done at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. This is basically an endothelial function study, or a preservation of endothelial function study, if you will. These researchers had already shown in non-Juice Plus studies that when a person eats a meal that contains a lot of fat, the metabolism of that fat produces a significant excess of free radicals, of these reactive species. And it is so many that it can at least partially paralyze the activity of the endothelium for up to 6 hours. Up to 6 hours after a heavy meal, that endothelial function is compromised, therefore blood flow and blood pressure regulation are compromised as well. The aim here was to see if the whole food-based nutrition in Juice Plus could protect the endothelium from all the oxidative damage that occurs after a heavy meal. 2 quick pictures. This was Juice Plus of 20 years ago, a red cap bottle of fruit capsules called Orchard, and a green cap bottle of vegetable and grain capsules called Garden. About 8 years ago, the Vineyard was added, a purple cap bottle with the nutrition from grapes and 8 different types of berries. Now, in this study, this was a 29-day study basically, and there were 3 groups. You can see the placebo, the Orchard and Garden group, and the Orchard, Garden, and Vineyard group. Under each are 3 columns. The first column was on day 0 before anybody started taking any capsules. The middle one was 20 days into the study, and the last one was day 29, which was 1 day after the last dose of capsules. What they did was measured a physiologic parameter called flow-mediated vasodilatation. Basically, in each participant, they put a blood pressure cuff on the arm and inflated it to higher than that person's systolic pressure and left it inflated for 5 minutes. Of course, the muscles of the forearm and hand are quickly become ischemic and anoxic. Lactic acid builds up. And in this situation, when the cuff is released, the typical response of an artery is to dilate as wide as it can to allow fresh blood in there as rapidly as possible. So what they did here was release the cuff, and they're measuring the diameter of the brachial artery with ultrasound and looking at the response of these arteries. But that dilatation is dependent upon normal endothelial function. If the endothelium is compromised, the artery will not be able to dilate as greatly. As you can see, the placebo group had about the same amount of problem after every meal. No statistical difference in those 3 times. If you look at the orchard and garden group and compare the last column, the purple one, to the placebo purple one, that difference indicates that 28 days of 2 of each of those capsules a day reduced the harmful impact of that meal on the endothelium by more than 60%. And then in the third group, when the vineyard was included, the reduction in harmful impact was more than 90%, almost completely protecting the endothelium from the excess oxidative damage that occurs after a fatty meal. A couple of more recent studies, a dermatology study done at a well-known skin health and dermatology treatment area hospital in Germany. They found 3 basic things. This improved the microcirculation in skin capillaries. This resulted in improved skin density and thickness and improved skin hydration. And just as an aside here, in my own opinion, I really think that this improved microcirculation, obviously it's not happening just in the skin, it's going to happen everywhere in the body. I think that we will eventually find a reduction in the risk of any complication of a problem that is based on circulatory deficiencies. Another study was a periodontal study. This was done in England by one of the leading periodontal researchers in the world, Dr. Ian Chappell. Basically, there were 2 groups of patients. All of them had an equivalent degree of periodontal disease, and all of them underwent standard periodontal treatment. Half of them were placebo and half were Juice Plus. They all got better. They all showed improvement in their periodontal condition, but the Juice Plus group had a greater measurable response, healing response to the treatment. There was a greater reduction in the periodontal pocket depth and a greater increase in the strength of the gingival attachment to the tooth. And this is, there are going to be other papers come from this because it continued on for some time. This is a study that helps us understand or helps us show that Juice Plus does indeed fill in that gap that exists in our diet because we don't eat enough of these foods. We can't like to say that it helps us bridge the gap between what we do eat and what we should eat with respect to phytonutrients. This was done at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and it compared 2 groups of women who had survived their first treatments, first rounds of treatments for ovarian cancer and were now in a remission. One group was to eat 5 or 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. The diet called a WHEL, W-H-E-L diet. And the other group was to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, take Juice Plus, and also use the one other product this company markets called Complete. It is a powdered protein-based supplement that can be added to a smoothie, for instance. A lot of it is soy protein, but there's a lot of other ancient grain protein and pea protein, pomegranate, pumpkin, etc. in that as well. So the conclusion here was that the 5-a-day group with Juice Plus got equally as much whole food nutrition as the group that ate the 10 servings a day. And also the soy and the Juice Plus Complete contributed to a greater increase or a better protein status in this group. And there were no issues of any type, negative issues from this in these cancer survivors. One more study, most recently in July of this year, published in the Journal of Pediatrics, a children's study, 30 lean or overweight boys aged 6 to 10. And this was a bioavailable, well, each took one capsule a day of each of the fruit and the vegetable for 6 months and received some healthy lifestyle instruction as well. We showed good bioavailability. This was blood testing again in these children. And also in the Juice Plus group, we found improved insulin resistance and reduced abdominal fat mass in the heavy boys. And just looking at those two effects, when we're addressing two of the most common and most serious health problems we have in America right now, I think this is very exciting information. So as clinicians, as physicians, I want to ask you to consider Juice Plus from three aspects. First is personal. Please look at the whole food nutrition intake of yourself and your family, your loved ones. Look at the level of oxidative stress in your lifestyle, and please take advantage of the proven benefits of this whole food-based nutrition. Second, I want to ask you to look at it from a patient standpoint. I've covered this a little bit earlier. Our patients pretty much all are deficient in whole food nutrition, and I am absolutely certain that their risk of complications and of new problems and the rate of progression of whatever they have is going to be significantly improved by whole food-based nutrition. And I really believe that our treatments of them will be more effective. Third, I want to ask you to look at it from a practice standpoint. Most of us have reactive practices. We are taking care of people who already have problems, and we have to react to those problems. We have no good understanding of how to add a wellness or a preventative aspect to a typical modern day medical practice. The Juice Plus program, this wellness program, is a ready-made turnkey operation that can fit smoothly into any practice setting with no interruption in patient flow, no interruption in the workings of your office. And we can easily get you more information about how that works. We don't want a practitioner to have to give a nutrition lecture to every patient. That would not be the right way to go about this. It certainly would not be time efficient. Also, one other thing I want to ask you to consider. Most of us are working longer and harder for less money, less income than we made last year. And in a time or in this current day when so many non-medical people are telling us that our services are not worth what they were worth last year and that next year will be even more so, please realize that if you so choose, you can earn income by recommending Juice Plus to your patients. And it is a program wherein you also get paid every month. The patient does not have to come see you. Kurt, I'm going to end it there and turn it back over to you, sir.
Paul, thank you so much. I've never had such a thorough explanation of just understanding what actually is in the food we eat, or better, I should say, with the food we don't eat and the benefits to us. But I wanted to let everyone that's listening to this webinar know that I have been working with physicians internationally that are telling us today that when they see a patient, it's a different initial encounter because the patient today is educated beyond what the patient in the past was, if for no other reason other than the internet and things like WebMD and all the alternative things that are online. And your patient comes in really demanding that there be preventative and wellness and natural options presented to them. And I think Paul talked about the fact that there are not a lot of courses and training and work being done in medical school today to prepare the average physician to delve into this arena. And we want you to see that fruits and vegetables can be a feasible option. All of you get many of these journals, you read the newspapers, and you see the media talking about fruits and vegetables. But many of the physicians that I know have given up because when they did recommend it, compliance was so low. And as the three areas that Paul mentioned, not for you personally, for your patients, and also from a business and a practice perspective, we have made available to you an option within the medical practice of a Juice Plus franchise. And that can be set up through our program called the Professional Support Program. We want to partner with you to help you and your patients realize the benefits from the number one selling whole food nutrition product in the world and the most medically researched nutrition product in the world, which Paul explained so phenomenally. So as you wrap up listening to this webinar tonight, we would love to have a one-on-one consultation with you to talk to you about any information or questions you might have and to show you how our professional support program might arm you to bring this product and the element of prevention to your patients in a new and greater way. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you again, Dr. Paul Williams, for sharing such great information tonight. Have a great night. Bye-bye.